You're listening to Street Life, a podcast about street photography with John ST and Mark Davidson.
You're listening to Street Life. I'm Mark Davidson, a street photographer from Melbourne, Australia, and with me, as always, my smiley little mate, Mr. John ST. How you doing?
I'm doing really well, thanks, Mark. How's yourself?
Couldn't be more delighted, to be honest with you, John. I've got one of my favourite photographers on the podcast today, so I'm super looking forward to introducing her a little bit later. But first, I just want to ask you a quick question, John, if that's all right.
Ooh, it's out of left field. Go on and fire away.
So
I'm married. Sorry, Mark, you're not my type. No, not going to happen.
Damn. Well, that's over.
Yeah, all right. Go on, fire away.
So we've been photographing for roughly the same period of time. You know, maybe a year or two longer. But I just wanted to know. So when you look back at your archive from 5-6 years ago, do you like those photos you took? You know, when you were starting out. I know you probably photograph a little bit differently, or do you want to burn them all in a skip fire, or how do you feel towards your earlier work?
I think my earlier work was terrible, and
Really?
a lot of it was coffee.
I know you did your coffee stuff, but after that, when you started doing your street,
Yeah, it was pretty average, wasn't it?
I don't think so. Because I was thinking about it because my early stuff's crap, but I was looking at your stuff from 5 years ago when you first started, and you've been really consistent the whole time. So I just I know you're thinking about doing some more projects and things like that. So I was just wondering if you did, would you sort of delve back into the archive and pull anything out, or you like your more recent stuff?
I think even when you first start, you always find a couple of images that I think you become more consistent as you get better and the more you do it, because you know how to frame up and you just see things quicker and you become more experienced and blah, blah, blah. But I'm sure when we first start, because we're so fresh and we're so excited by it all, we do manage to fluke in some ways some great images, yeah?
Of course,
but I don't think we should ever... Look, I don't think my stuff that I did early on's very... Thankfully, I think I'm doing better stuff now. I would hope so. That's for other people to judge, not myself. I think I am. But I'm not ashamed of anything I've done. And if people want to go back on my 3,500 images on Instagram, you will see all my old stuff on there. I haven't taken anything down.
Yeah, nice.
So it's all still there if you can be bothered scrolling through it. And you can see my journey of how
I was going to say your progression, for sure.
Because people go, they often say, how do you find images like that, John? Well, I didn't start like this. I had to work towards it. And there is a journey. And it's taking lots and lots of really bad photographs to learn how to make better ones, So
of course.
I'm not ashamed at all. What about you, Mark?
Well, I mean, my
you
stuff...
would burn all yours in a skip?
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but I mean, I think my stuff from when I was first starting out was so different, isn't it, John, to what I'm shooting now? So
it is.
I mean, I started off doing that, deep shadows, exposing for the highlights, all that kind of stuff, and sort of moved away from that a little bit. So it's just totally different from what I was doing 5 years ago. But I'm sure there'd be one or two that I'm still, relatively happy with. But yeah, I just thought, I don't know, because as I said, your style has remained relatively consistent over that time, and you've just sort of built on that, which is good. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I probably, as I said, keep a couple of images, but generally, no, I'm not really a fan of any of that early stuff.
But you get bored with your stuff. I don't get bored.
Yeah.
I like doing what I'm doing, so I keep doing it. And then every now and again, I drift off and I try something different and it'll end up on my feed, but I always end up going back to what I like.
Yeah.
Which can be quite restrictive in some ways because it can become quite boring, which is why I sort of drift off for a month or two, do different stuff, but then always come back. Yeah. The grass isn't always greener, Mark.
It's true.
But I look at your stuff and I would say that you've probably progressed more than what I have. So yours has become far more artistic, I think, in some regards.
Well, you say that.
Stretch the boundaries a lot.
You say that, but I missed a shot this week. So I was out. I saw like a bridal gown with a veil just sitting at the tram stop. So I thought, hang on. So I went over to have a look at it, and then a woman just ran up and grabbed it and started putting it on. I'm like, what's she doing? And so I snapped a couple of frames, and anyway, I walked away. A couple 100 metres down the road, I saw her again, and she was there with the veil over her face, this amazing expression, leaning against a pole and vaping. And I went to take the photo, and I hadn't wound my film on. And I never do that. I haven't advanced my film I'd never ever do that. So I completely missed the shot. By the time I did, she'd turned her head and walked away. I'm like, missed it.
And there you go, kids. That's why you don't shoot film.
I know. I'm like such an idiot. I'm like, I don't know why I did that. Anyway,
Mark, it doesn't matter.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter.
It's gone.
It's the one that got away.
Yeah.
You know, it's the Moby Dick type thing. You know, it's your white whale.
But I just remember going, here we go. But hang on.
But
anyway,
that same thing could happen with digital, because I shoot manual and then suddenly I don't have my settings right and I'm shooting in pitch dark because I've seen something real quick and I've thrown my camera across, taken the shot, and it hasn't focused. If it's the XT5, it wouldn't have focused properly. Bit of a dig Fuji, sorry. And then you know, sometimes you miss it, sometimes you get it. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. You move on.
The way it is. Exactly. You know, don't dwell on it. There'll be another shot.
No, I'm not. I was just, it was just interesting because I haven't done that before.
It would have been awesome. That would have been another competition winner for you, Mark.
Definitely not.
No, so I don't care.
Good.
I'm not bothered. I'm not bothered. I think it's important that everybody looks back at where they started and where they're going, because, you know, I think when I was first starting off, I was probably had a lot more enthusiasm for taking shots of anything and everything, and I wasn't as fixated on particular things, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, there you go.
Well, enough reminiscing.
Enough, Mark.
It's time to introduce our guest, John, so why don't you go ahead and do the honours?
Today, we're joined by Alison McCauley. She's an English documentary and street photographer who was based in Geneva, Switzerland, but recently moved to the south of France. Alison initially studied visual art and painting before transitioning to photography. Her approach to street photography is spontaneous, open-ended, and subjective, capturing a diverse range of subjects, including people, objects, and landscapes. Alison has published a number of books, including Shimmer and Anywhere But Here. It gives us great pleasure to welcome Alison to the Street Life podcast. Thanks for joining us, Alison.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Alison. Look, thanks so much for your time. I'm a great admirer of your work. You're a huge inspiration to me. So let's start by talking about your journey into photography. I believe you were into painting before you picked up the camera. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. I painted for a very long time, and I studied painting at university. I did a bachelor's in visual arts, but I specialized in painting. But already towards the end of that degree, I started getting very interested in photography. But I kind of pushed it away because I was on that path to photography. I was probably maybe a bit lazy. I could have changed, but I didn't. So I continued with photography and continued for many, many years later. And it was just kind of in me. I was interested in it, but I didn't really do much about it. And then I'd say about 5 years later, I suddenly decided, it has to be photography. And I decided at that time that because I'd waited so long, I needed to kind of fast forward a little bit. And I was trying to think, what is the best way to do that? And I had this stupid idea that doing a degree would be the best way. So I'm not saying that doing a degree is a bad way of doing it. It's just that the one that I did was distance learning. And it was in the days before the internet was really up and running well. So it was a very isolating experience. And I learned a lot about the books to read and the books to look at. But apart from that, I missed out on all the sort of student interaction and that kind of thing, because it was, I was on my own at home most of the time. But it did get me started. And as soon as I'd finished that degree, which I rushed through as quickly as I possibly could, that was the beauty of doing it by distance learning. You could go as fast as you wanted. So I didn't really put too much effort into it. I just kind of finished it and got through it and passed. And then I think my journey really started then, as soon as I was finished. And then I was free to do what I wanted. And I probably did learn quite a bit from it, but it wasn't an enjoyable experience. I started to enjoy it once I'd finished and was free to do what I wanted to do.
Well, I think all the fun is hands-on, isn't it? When you get out there and you actually just start, studying sort of just a bit of paperwork, really, in theory, which all the fun is going out and shooting. So you moved from painting to photography. What was it about photography that interested you the most, and why were you attracted particularly to street photography?
Well, it started because I felt extremely isolated as a painter. I very isolating thing unless you're lucky enough to share a huge studio with lots of great people. You're quite alone. But I am very passionate about visual arts. So painting, drawing, yes, and anything really, anything that you can see, and especially anything that's 2D, I love. And I think photography was just a better fit because it got me out in the world. And I was able to, practice a visual art form, but with people, which was, the perfect mixture. So I think I really enjoyed that side of it. And then I realized that I just liked the fact that you could do it quickly. You can take a picture quickly, but then you build it up. You build it up by putting pictures together. And this whole idea of, telling stories, even though they're not, not particularly into very linear stories or very clear stories, but this idea of putting something together so that it's greater than the sum of its parts. I really love that. And I think photography can be very, very good at that. Far better than painting, I think.
I find it interesting that you're saying that you found painting quite, what was the word you used? Sorry, Alison? Isolating. Because photography is also quite an isolating thing because you go out, especially street photography, go out by yourself. So what was it about it that the photography, do you interact with people on the street, or is it just being amongst everything, whereas you're in a studio painting or maybe just standing on a bank? I don't know what you painted, by the way. So, a landscape or something, and you were like doing that with the thumb and stuff. Is it being just amongst people and that rush of everything passing you? Is that what you mean?
That's part of it, but also when I first started, I started with street photography because that is what's accessible. It's there. You can practice. You can become better in the street, and I did really enjoy it. And I still that way of working is still the greatest part of what I do. But after initially working in street photography, I moved on to a more documentary style, and in hindsight, I realized I wasn't the right person to do that. I'm not very good at logistics. I don't remember dates. I don't remember names. And in fact, I'm actually not very interested in all of that either. But I just like taking the pictures and I like putting them together and trying to create something. And I obviously didn't care about people. But, I just don't think I'm the best person for that. I'm more sort of towards the artistic side probably. And it just wasn't a fit. But what I did love was meeting people and getting to know them. And I got myself in these crazy situations. I went to Auroville, which is this strange kind of utopian, quote unquote, society in India, and then hung out with people there and did things that I would never have done without having the camera as an excuse. So I really love that. And nowadays, I meet people through photography. Obviously, you can meet people through painting, but not as much, I don't think. I think there's more of a community of photographers. And wherever you go, you'll sooner or later, you'll find them, the people who love it as much as you do. And I think that's a great thing.
Absolutely, just like this. And when we introduced the podcast, you will have noticed it's called Street Life, and your work doesn't really neatly fit into the category of street photography. So how does that label street photographer sit with you, Alison?
It sits comfortably with me. I consider myself a photographer, really, primarily. But I do think the street photography does fit for me because what I like to do is I like to find things. I don't want to set things up. I don't want really to do lots of portraits. And if I do a portrait, it's a quick portrait of someone. I don't want to spend too much time, making everything perfect. I really like to find something. So it can be anything. And it can be in the wilds of, some rural location. It doesn't have to be in the street. But it's this approach of just finding stuff and then photographing it as it is without intervening and without really, just spending too much time thinking about it. I think a lot before and I think a lot after, but I don't think while I'm doing it. I just photograph. That's street photography, I think.
It's really interesting you say that because, I look at your work and a project of yours like Shimmers where you're shooting the Cannes Film Festival or shooting in Cannes and, you shoot it in such a unique way that no one else has really captured the festival or the people of Cannes like that. And so I was actually going to touch on that. do you go out with a project in mind, or do you just take a lot of photos and the themes and the project comes organically later on?
More the latter, yeah. I start something and then the idea comes from what I've started to gather. I always think of photography as, for me, as collecting a little bit. So you take a few pictures and they get added to a collection, and then I start to think about, what is this? What's it about? And I think that's the process that works best for me. I have in the past, I've had ideas and I've set out, especially when I was trying to work in documentary style, I'd have an idea and I'd go and I'd try and photograph it. And I found it so rigid and so tricky that, I mean, some of the stories were published and, you know, it worked quite well, but I personally found them quite dull. And later on, I looked back at those pictures, and some of them I've taken them out of their original context and put them into something else. And I think it's become much more interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's probably not a great thing to do in some situations because, you know, it wouldn't be right in some situations. But in the projects that I was working in, it did work. And I also think, for me personally, I need time. I really need a lot of time to figure out what I'm doing.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not somebody who works well under pressure. I work really well under no pressure. I just need time to do what I want to do and to figure things out slowly.
Alison, when I was looking at your work, it's quite diverse in nature. It wouldn't necessarily be called traditional, what many would, the gatekeepers of the world, would call traditional street photography. And I was looking at it, it all seems to flow in a certain way, and it all seems to go together, but I can't put my finger on it. It all looks like your work, and you could call it street, but it's almost a mixture of lots of different genres, okay? All mixed into one, but it all seems to flow. Now, a lot of people will say, look, if you want to label yourself a street photographer, you have to have a human element in the frame, and it has to have a person there. How do you feel about that? Because a lot of your images don't. And yet I still feel that connection to it towards street when I look at them.
Yes, well, as I say, I love street photography. I love the approach, but there is one thing I really don't like, and that's about what it is and isn't. And I mean, I think it is. There have to be some limits. Obviously, I don't believe that you should be going around setting things up and you know, changing things. But I think it's as wide as you want it to be, and you know, if you look at, there's quite a lot of other photographers who don't fit neatly into that, but work in that style. Even Robert Frank, for example, an early example of somebody who did a lot of work that could be called street photography, but I mean, he did documentary work as well. It's not kind of typical. It's not what you expect.
Yeah.
No. But Alison, just talking on Robert Frank, because, you know, we do a bit of research on our guests beforehand, and I understood from what I can read up that you were quite a big fan of Henri Cartier-Bresson, and then you moved away from him, and you said in another interview that you moved towards Robert Frank and you became more interested in him and less interested. You started, I don't want to say you became bored, but you know, it wasn't as inspiring HPC. Do you know what I mean? But you just mentioned something about setting images up. Robert Frank was actually, in his Americans, was actually caught out setting up particular images for one in particular. With the famous one was the young girl in the lift, and apparently that was a stage shot.
Broken my heart. That's what it was.
I believe it was a stage shot that he got the girl to pose. So how do you feel about that when Robert Frank is one of your influences? I don't want to break your heart, but
well, I think just with that one, he was obviously in the lift. You know, I don't think he necessarily set the whole shot up. He was in the lift with her and took a few frames, I think, is my understanding, isn't it, John? That his contact sheet showed that he'd done a few different variations of the shot. I don't know. I don't know if he completely went out to set it up, but yeah.
All controversy on the Street Life podcast. Sorry, Alison, didn't mean to throw you under the bus there.
Part of the beauty of that shot, though, is Kerouac's writing.
Yeah.
In his intro, mentioned that shot. He said something like... I can't remember, but towards the girl in the elevator, can I have your number or something like that? And it's just really cool. And
right, okay. So what led you to move away from what some people consider the godfather of street.
I think he's amazing. His
Yeah.
photographs are gorgeous, and I kind of I was very, very influenced by him in my early kind of street photography days, and really into form and keeping everything perfect. And in the end, I felt like for me, it was all getting too clean and perfect and tidy. And I didn't like it. I just thought it was cold. And I wanted some, when I looked more into Robert Frank, I saw the sort of grittiness of it and the mess and the shooting through dirty windows and, of the car and things like that. And I just love that. It seems so alive and so warm and somehow more layered and richer. Whereas I think Cartier-Bresson almost was quite formulaic. Not everything he did, because he did a lot of different things, but his most best-known street work was I think he almost followed formulas. He tried to get things in certain places and tried to keep everything clear. And I just thought that's too much of a game. I don't want to do that. I want to be more in touch with, something inside of me rather than just trying to make the perfect picture.
For sure. And Alison, so, Robert Frank, he's a Swiss photographer who went to America and photographed, and you're English born, you're living in Switzerland and now in the south of France and various other places around the world. So you moved around a lot as a child. So how was your childhood? Did you enjoy being on the move all the time? And how do you think that's influenced your photography? I moved around a lot. I lived in a lot of different countries. Some I absolutely loved. Like we lived in Malaysia when I was very small. I have very, very fond memories of that. Wow. Then after that, we moved to Canada. I had 4 miserable years in school. I was bullied because they said I had an English accent. So I don't know why that would make them want to bully me. But after that, we went to Brazil, and I just absolutely adored Brazil. I really loved it. And I think I've only just realized this, but I think that the influence was that probably the division of those two kinds of places, the cold places, cold physically, in terms of temperature and also in terms of the environment, were places where I was never that happy. And then in the warm places, people seemed, very welcoming and lovely, and the countries were chaotic, often dirty. And I realized that I love that. I really love that. And I think maybe that's what I want to get through in my photographs. I like the mess. I like the imperfections. I'm hoping for some warmth, for some life. Yeah. And I'm trying to, when I first started getting into this style of photography, I think I was trying to get away from something too clinical and too perfect and a little bit cold. I mean, I like this idea of expressing something from within. And I think that is something that you can do out and about, working in a very spontaneous way. Forgive my ignorance, Alison, but I'm not sure if you've already done this, but have you been back to Brazil to photograph?
I haven't. I left in the early 80s, which is a hell of a long time ago. And I'm almost scared to go back because the country I left, it no longer exists. It's moved on. It's so different. And I will go back. One of these days I'll go back. Yeah. But I'm a bit worried because I have such perfect memories. It's really, in terms of the country I've loved the most, Brazil. Yeah. So it's kind of tough thinking, I'll go back and maybe that beautiful image will be ruined forever. Yeah. But I've actually started working on a project that is quite interesting to me, probably, maybe not to anyone else. But I want to, the Brazilians have this expression called saudades, which means it's a kind of longing for your mother country or longing for someone. There's no exact translation in English, but I'm working on a project that I'm calling Saudade. And the idea is to find things or places that remind me of Brazil, of all the good things of Brazil. And I'm putting those together. I'm not quite sure where it's going, but I like this idea more than the idea of actually going back to Brazil. Because if I were to do that, I can only go back I don't have anyone to stay with anymore. I could only go back for 2 or 3 weeks, maybe 4. And I don't think I can get a really good project in that time. So by doing it this way, I kind of honoring my memory of Brazil, but without actually having it destroyed by possibly going back. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
I think because you said you were in Brazil, was it in the 80s you said when you were in
Yes.
Brazil? I think.
70s. I arrived in the 70s.
Oh, there you go. Well, we see things very differently at different stages of our lives. So often when I left the UK, I was homesick when I came to Australia, and I missed England terribly, and I thought Australia was a terrible place until I went back, because I left when I was 16. So, and it wasn't anywhere near the rosy picture of how I imagined it as a young teenager compared to when I went back in my mid-20s. It was completely different. I was in a different part of my life. You know, I had a bit more life experience, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm sure that I still have that rosy memory of the UK, and I'm sure you would too. But I think as you get older, you just see the world differently because you experience things differently. So I'm sure if you went back to Brazil, you would find something just... Nostalgia might be broken a little bit, your dreams of how the rose-tinted glasses that you saw everything through. But I'm sure you could go back there and maybe you could document it in a different way, you know?
Yes, for sure. I will. I will definitely. But first I'll do this non-Brazil project, and then
Yeah, it sounds like you've got a lot on your plate there. So you've got something. So I just want to touch on also your style of photography, okay? So when I look through your images... We had a chat with a photographer who was talking about, what was that lad's name? Was it Davison or something who was talking?
Davidson, that's me.
Yeah, no, there was another one. There's another one. He takes very interesting images, and it was Joshua K. Jackson mentioned that he particularly liked this photographer.
Oh, Jack Davison, yeah.
Jack Davison, there you go. Sorry, I knew it was Davison. There you go. It's not all about you, Mark. So, he was talking about Jack Davison as being quite inspiring because he looked at his work and he didn't know how he created that image. And when I look at your images, Alison, I look at them and I think, that's amazing. But how the hell did you create it? And I'm left stumped and looking at it. So what are the techniques that you use you've developed?
Don't tell him.
You have to worry about Mark because he goes off and tries different things. I always end up back at the same thing. What are the techniques that you
always
use?
joke with friends that I'm going to say, I'll tell you during my workshop in 2035. No, I'm really into experimentation. And when I first started, the very early photographs of Anywhere But Here, it happened by accident. And I was in a coffee shop on a very cold day. I was sick of trying to photograph outside. And I just had a little Canon compact thing, a little digital camera. And I was playing around with the flash. And with the flash, I got the reflection somehow angling it properly. I got the reflection of what was going on inside, and I could see clearly what was going on outside it within the same frame. And I didn't really think much of it at the time, but afterwards I looked through it and I got two pictures that I thought, wow, this is something that's worthwhile. And these pictures are still pictures I honor now. They're in, one of them's in my book, Anywhere But Here. And from that, I started to think, how can I continually create that mood and atmosphere that I got in that accident? So I kind of photographed a lot through glass and through dirty things, dirty mirrors, things like that. And then, I realized I can't always do that. So shall I make my lens dirty? Shall I do things like that? And I started to do that. I made my own filters that I attached to the camera, and it happened like that. That's mostly what I do.
Oh, so you shoot through filters?
You can get the ones in the store that I'm sure you know, as you
get Pro Miss and stuff like that.
But they're very predictable.
Yes.
So I think if you make something yourself, they don't last very long, especially if they're plastic, because they get very scratched up and you can get to the point where you can't see anything anymore. but it's quite fun and it's much more spontaneous. There are a lot that don't work, of course, and lots of failures. But if there's no pressure, then that doesn't matter.
But it's interesting you should say that, because we all go out trying to get the best camera, to get the sharpest images, and here you are whacking a piece of dirty plastic on the front of your lens and creating super interesting art where I go, what technique has, Alison used to create that? It was a dirty cup. You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't have thought about it,
With a crappy little camera.
I'm always cleaning my lens and Making sure it doesn't have any spots on it and stuff, Wow.
No, spot on. And I'm just holding up a picture of one of your images, Alison. A guy smoking. I think it's either a reflection or a double exposure.
Yes,
not too
that's
sure.
from a train, from a moving train. He was in the train station.
Right.
I was going past the train. So
that's an amazing image. I love that. But no, I love you just experimenting and playing around. And I sort of do similar things, but obviously not going to lengths of scratching up filters and things like that. But yeah, I love hearing all that. And do you actually mix? Do you shoot just digital or some film as well? Or
I have shot a lot of film in the past. At the moment, the only film camera I have left is a Polaroid.
Yeah. Okay.
But I have a lot of quite a few of the photographs in anyway, but here are film.
Right.
Most are digital. And then in Shimmers, I think there's probably a couple that are film, but mostly digital. Right. But I think I can make them look the same. I
yes.
think
it's exactly what I was going to say, because this is super interesting to me, because I'm kind of going through the same thing at the moment. But so you have no qualms about mixing film and digital, because as you just said, you can't really tell the difference. So I think that's great.
No, I think I don't like restrictions.
No.
I think they do exactly what they want to do. And anything goes within reason.
Yeah,
we're definitely getting a clearer picture here that Alison does not like boundaries.
Yeah,
and being stuck inside a box, so to speak. You want your creative energy to be able to go wherever it takes you and not be restricted by rules and regulations, because we have enough in that in life already. And I think you can see that in your work, Alison. It's fabulous. It's really, really super cool. So when you create this image, Alison, you've obviously got something in your mind that you want to portray, but what do you hope that people see in the images that you're creating? Often when we take an image, we have the whole context of what we've seen behind it, but when you post up an image, people will see whatever they want to see. So what you're hoping that people will get from your creative work and frames and photos when they see them?
I think it would depend on each project and what the project is trying to express. But I would say that there is a general kind of theme of restlessness, maybe. Sort of a little bit of longing or sadness, maybe, but not sad, but just a little bit of melancholy, really.
Yes.
That I find kind of beautiful. I mean, I'm a happy person. I have a happy life, but I've never found, happiness and joy to be, for me personally, to be a great inspiration creatively. I prefer to tap into the darker side of things. So it's not by any means hopeless. It's just a sort of just this kind of feeling of longing, of searching for something else, maybe restlessness. I think I would say that, and I have other things that I'm interested in, like my identity. But I hope that other people can also relate to that. I mean, nowadays people do move a lot. People are very global. A lot of people have mixed heritage. And I think they can probably relate to those feelings of sort of identity and belonging or not belonging. Yeah, so I would say, I'm not answering your question very well, but I would say that probably an emotion is some sort of emotion is what I would.
And just applying that to your current project, Alison, so, you say that you get inspired by, the darker side and I guess isolation and feelings such as that. So how are you using that to do your current Brazil project, not in Brazil? So are you shooting that in France or in Europe, or how are you approaching
it will be whenever something reminds me of Brazil, which I say in Europe so far hasn't been happening a lot. I want to go to Portugal because that was and the whole thing came about by accident. I was lucky enough to have a really lovely holiday in Costa Rica last winter. And it was while I was there, I was just kind of moved by how much it reminded me of my years in Brazil. I mean, they had red earth, they had cows with the big humps on the backs. And I started just taking pictures of these things that reminded me of Brazil. And I thought, oh, maybe this is a project, because I had been thinking, I've got to go back to Brazil. I've got to try and make something of that. And I thought, why don't I just do this first and see how that goes, and then see Brazil.
Fantastic. And what are your goals with photography, Alison? Where do you do you have any goals, or you just like going out and chipping away, with photo by photo? Is there a sort of a grand plan with your work?
Not really. I mean, I love, my favorite form for viewing photographs is in a book. Mm-hmm. And I feel extremely lucky to have had, I've done other books before, the ones I did with photo editions, but the two that I did with photo editions, Anywhere But Here and Shimmers, are for me perfect. And I'm so happy, and I feel so lucky to have been able to do those books. So kind of in a way, I feel like the pressure's off a little bit, I would love to do more books, but I'm not feeling that I need to do it in the near future.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the other thing I love doing is I love making my own books. So I always feel like if I do something and I feel it should be a book, I would rather than chasing some publisher that will probably say no or might say no, I think I would rather just get a book out there and, 20 or 30 or 40 copies that I make myself by hand. And, there are limits when you make something by hand, obviously, but then there's also that lovely sort of tactile feel to it, and that I feel goes with my photographs. I don't think Alex Webb his work would look good in a handmade book, but I think it works for mine. It fits well.
Absolutely.
So I feel it's nice because, if I feel a project should be a book, I'll just make one. It doesn't bother me that only 30 people will see it.
So I just want to ask you, because I think it's interesting when people first start, they just go, I still take single images, but you're talking about creating projects, etc., all of the time, and you're always looking at the bigger picture, and it has to be, you're looking at creating another project on Brazil. But when you go out, do you take your camera out with you all of the time, or do you have specific time where you go, right, I'm going to go out and I've got this project in mind, and I'm going to go and find photos or create photos that for this particular ideal or thought that I've got about for a project? Or do you just go out and shoot everything and anything and then come back and look at your images and then start moving them around and go, well, that can go with that and that could go with that? How does your whole process work? Because we're all very different, and we love to hear what other people, how they
think,
work with things.
All of those. I do all of but
Right.
mostly always having a camera with me, unless it's sociably, unacceptable. Then I won't. But someone will have to tell me you can't bring your camera, or I'll bring my camera. And that's why I like small cameras. They fit in a bag, they fit in a pocket. So yeah, I always have one with me. And my favorite way of taking photographs is just to be doing things and living life and being with people. And even if I don't photograph the people, maybe more and more I seem to be moving more towards what's going on around people rather than the actual people. Yeah, I like to just see what happens and get it. If you go out with the idea of working on a project, it can be great and you can get some things, but then there's that pressure again, which
you don't like.
But I do it sometimes, especially if I feel like something's not going well. But sometimes I'll do that, and then I'll realize this is not going anywhere, and then it can be a bad sign if I have to go out to work on a project.
And when you go out with your camera all of the time, I'm one of those people. How do you deal with? Mark Fernley had this problem with his wife. How do you deal with having to? I've been told I can't switch off. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm always looking. I can't switch off. How do you have you got a very supportive partner? How do you deal with that? Because when you have your camera with you, it's even more of an incentive to keep looking for a shot. How do you distinguish living life and living in the moment and capturing it? And how does your family or partner, husband,
true.
Or whatever?
It does separate you from life a little bit. It's a layer that takes you further away from people. But I mean, if you're as nutty about photography as we are, then you have to accept that. But I do have a very understanding partner and a very inspiring daughter who likes to be photographed, which is great. My son, not so much, so I don't have as many photographs of him. But yes, so in my book Shimmers, my daughter accounted. I didn't do the editing, I didn't choose the pictures, but she appears 6 times.
Oh wow!
It looks like it's very spontaneous photography. So kind of fits with the street photography process, but she's there. He appears in it once. And so I said, look, if you were a bit nicer and let me take more photographs of you, you would have been in the book more.
And I also read that your parents don't like you photographing you, and you also even went further and said they don't like your photographs. Is this the case, or?
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. My mother is still with us. Yes, no, they never liked. They don't like having their photograph taken, and they especially like, they like nice, clear photographs, preferably color with people smiling and lined up nicely. No, it's nice.
Not your style,
But
no.
Fine, it's fine. It's okay. They're fabulous. They were fabulous gardeners, so they have their own creativity, but it's they don't get what I do, I don't think.
So what leads you more towards, because you've mentioned color there and your parents prefer it, and it's one of those, again, polarizing things. People say the world's in color, and and then there's other people who photograph in black and white and say, well, that's distracting, and the real image, a black and white image, will show the heart and soul of a scene. What draws you to particularly black and white and not color, and would you ever shoot in color?
I have shot in color in the past.
You have? Okay.
In even street photography, I did a series called. I heard you mentioned talking earlier about how you were going for deep shadows and exposing the pilot. I did that for a very long time as well. And then I just got, again, it was getting gimmicky. I realized I'm actually very sensitive to color. I love color. And I found myself chasing sort of matching colors and things like that. And I thought, this has got to stop. It's a bit silly. But then, and that is true. But also, I just feel like my photographs don't really show reality as it is. They show an idea of it, maybe my idea of it, but it's so detached from how the scene actually looked. And in order to take it one step further, black and white fits that better than color would.
Just touching on that, as you just mentioned, I started out shooting that way, with the deep shadows exposing for highlights. So what's your relationship like with social media, if I can ask? It's been a bit of a topic on the podcast in the last couple of months. And has that had a positive or negative effect on your photography, would you say?
It's really quite hard to know. I mean, I was slightly later than most people coming to social media. I think I started using it in 2011, which was a little bit later than many people. And I found it kind of slightly overwhelming, but also I didn't know how to act when people were rude and things like that. I was really shocked.
Oh, no.
But I know how it works now, obviously. But I wonder if I would have developed the way I did without it, because it's so fantastic to be able to have that feedback. Sometimes it's, you don't want it, but you can get a general idea of how people are feeling about things. And I don't, I've never been after an enormous following. I don't have an enormous following, really. I have quite a small one compared to many people. But the people who do follow me, I think are quite loyal. And I think that's really lovely. I love that. And then there are people who I have been following since 2011. And I find it fascinating just to see their journey as well. And it's really lovely to see some of the people who started out on social media at the same time as me. And I see that they're having books published now. And it's nice. And the ones who work really hard and they're doing well, and that's a lovely thing. One thing I don't do is share too much personally in a sort of open social media, because I just don't feel comfortable with it. I'll do it through work or through something like this where it feels safer somehow. And I'm not getting involved in politics or anything like that on social media. It's just there's too many silly comments. It's too open. I think it's a good thing, but I have to put up that's where I do need limits.
Boundaries, yeah.
So touching on social media, we all know that people love to comment and they feel a lot braver behind a screen. I can't imagine you've had much negative feedback in your journey. But have you received any negative feedback about what you're doing And how have you dealt with that, Alison? And how would you go about it? Because it can really knock people's confidence.
Yeah, I haven't on social media. Not in a major way, but I was a member of a little camera club in Geneva.
Camera club.
and they didn't like what I was doing at all. They were kind of questioning whether I knew how to use my focus and things like that. But no, on social media, no, I haven't had to. But I think I have protected myself as well by not exposing too much. And there's been an odd comment on, like, I don't like that picture. I was like, I don't mind. That's all right. I mean, that's fine. Yeah.
Honestly,
so I don't mind.
If you're not upsetting someone, you're not doing something. You're not doing it right. I don't think so.
There seems to be a common thing with camera clubs around the world now that they don't seem to get street photography at all.
Yeah.
If it's not of a nice landscape or a rose in a garden, then they just don't get it. It's like, well, Alison, that's not in focus, and it's really gritty, and we don't quite get it, and it doesn't meet the rule of thirds. So
you're out.
Yeah.
Go away and read a book and come back when you know what you're doing.
Well, that's really interesting. So what would you say would be the number one lesson that photography has taught you over the years, Alison?
I think to persevere, probably. Persevere first of all, to know what you love, or to find out what you love. Hopefully, if you're lucky enough to be able to find that, then persevere long enough. If you believe in yourself too, if you believe that you've got something worthwhile, that you're doing something well, just keep going. Because I think as we know, it takes time. It takes a long time.
Yeah.
And I think even working on a project, I think it can take 10 years to get so that you want it to be. So yeah, I don't think, I think that's probably the main thing. First, to have faith in yourself, to know what you want to do, and then to persevere doing it.
But how do you find that, Alison? How did you find knowing what you wanted to do? Was it just trial and error, or?
Yeah, it's partly by elimination, and partly by figuring out what was wrong for me with painting. I think that sort of led me, and then just the luck of picking up a book by Cartier-Bresson very early on and thinking, wow, how does he do this? And I became I'm not interested in it anymore. I don't even believe in it, but I was very interested in the idea of the decisive moment for a while. And finding that in painting, it's quite tough.
Yes.
Yeah. So although I don't believe that, I don't think there's one decisive moment. That I think it's quite silly, really, a silly concept. But it kept me going in the beginning for a few years.
So was there anybody close that, we all get inspired by the big names, Gary Winogrand, Robert Frank, et cetera, et cetera. Was there anybody that sort of helped you on your journey that was a mentor or an inspiration that wasn't necessarily a big name?
I have a lot of photographers who I really love, like Trent Park, Jeff Jackson, then painters like Mark Rothko, Jackson Pollock even. I mean, in a way, I never wanted to do what somebody else does, and I've never sort of directly taken from them, but I think they've kind of fed into how I want to express things. And so, yeah, Martin Bogren, who did Tractor Boys.
Yes.
He did?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I love his work. And I think, I think he's amazing because he can go in and do a documentary project and it looks so personal and so beautiful, but then he can do street work as well. I think he's quite an amazing photographer, very inspiring. But I have so many photographers that inspire me, that too many to really mention. But then I think films are inspiring as well, books, and I think life itself, nature, everything can be a source of inspiration.
John did mention in the introduction that you just recently moved. Is that a photography-based decision to move, or is that just life in general, family?
It's life in general. My husband retired, so I could be anywhere, but he had to be in Geneva for a long time. And I've known this area for a long time, and I like it. And our two children are still in Geneva, so it's not too far away from them, but we're in the sun, and it's just a happier place. Next to the sea, people are more joyous. It's just more, I find it more pleasant. I mean, Geneva's lovely, don't get me wrong. It's a really lovely place, but it's a place to go and work. It's not a place to,
have fun.
Go or photograph. Really, it's quite hard to photograph. Whereas this is a place that has inspired me for a long time in the future, I think.
And the film festival has just wrapped up. How did it go? Did you get out amongst all the celebs and all that?
I went out every day, yeah. I'm not kind of looking for celebs, but if I could get a good one, I would. But they tend to be ones where you're sort of kind of trying to get over other people's heads and things.
Yes.
The best ones are sort of more accidental ones in the street and things. But yeah, I got a lot. I haven't really looked at them yet. I usually like to let things sit and then look at them later. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of work.
How long do you leave things to sit, Alison?
I like to leave them for a while. I think I make bad decisions if I go in too quickly. Sometimes I do. I just pick out 2 or 3 that I think are okay, and I'll share them, see if anyone thinks they're terrible or they're okay. But to really get the whole lot together and go through them, maybe a month to 3 months later. Yeah. So almost, almost like it was, even if it's digital, like it was film.
So we're coming to the end of our allotted time, Alison. We'll ask a few more questions, bit more light-hearted ones now. If you could have one superpower, street superpower, what would you have, Alison? And it can't be invisibility. Can't be that. If you could have one superpower on the street to make you a better photographer, what would it be?
Wow.
Maybe I'd like to be very, very small, because I'm
really?
I'm very tall, so very noticeable. So it'd be nice to be, if I was kind of like, a few centimeters tall, I could rush around with my very small camera. I really like I often crouch down so I can isolate people.
Right.
So that would be great if I was really small. Yeah, I'll be miniature.
Well, John and I are small. It's not all that's cracked up to be. So.
I don't know if it's a superpower.
Speak for yourself, Mark.
Look, Alison, thank you so much for joining us. It was absolutely wonderful chatting with you. As I said before, I've been gushing. You're one of my favourite photographers. We always finish the podcast with one slightly cliched question, and it's going to be interesting with you because you've moved all over the world. But if you could go anywhere in the world to photograph tomorrow, where would you go and why?
I think probably back to Asia again, because but one country, so I have to choose one country. Maybe Laos. Laos is very interesting.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful country. I've obviously done Luang Prabang and Vientiane and a few other things, but it'd be good to get out in the more rural areas. I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah. No, it's really, and it's much less developed than most of Southeast Asia.
Yeah. And what about Malaysia?
Would you have a project, Alison? Would you have a project there?
Maybe. I did do a project on my childhood in Malaysia. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Awesome. Fantastic. Cool. Thank you so much for your time, Alison. We really, really appreciate it. It was wonderful chatting, and thanks for giving us your time.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thanks very much, Alison. It was great talking to you.
Thank you. Bye. Have a nice day. Have a nice dinner too.